Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a really interesting topic that I think everyone's been hearing about.
Yeah.
It's the forced sale of TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been in the news a lot.
It has, and I think it goes way deeper than just one app, right?
Absolutely.
So this deep dive is really going to be about who gets to control what we see and hear online, especially, those voices that maybe we don't always hear from.
Right, the people who are kind of left out of the conversation a lot of the time.
Exactly. And our guide for this is going to be an article by Gamey Horrocks, PhD, titled Cyber Enclosures: How the Forced Sale of TikTok Mirrors Imperialism and Fuels the Surveillance State.
Just a light topic,
A little light reading, yeah.
keep it nice and easy. So one of the things that really struck me about this article is how it takes us all the way back to the Scottish Highlands, which kind of feels like a jump, right?
Yeah.
But just stay with me here.
Yeah, it's a bit of a surprising connection at first, but it makes sense when you dig into it.
So paint us a picture. What are we talking about here? Okay, so imagine rolling hills, beautiful scenery, and these families that have been farming this land together for generations.
Okay, I can see it. A real sense of community, right?
Exactly. That sense of community was really built around this shared land that they all relied on.
Okay, I'm with you so far. Beautiful scenery, tight-knit community, shared resources. But where does TikTok fit into this idyllic picture?
Well, that's where things get a little darker, unfortunately. See, in the 18th and 19th centuries, those shared lands were taken away from these communities.
That happened.
Through what were called the Enclosure Acts, powerful landowners basically fenced off this land, claiming it for themselves.
So these families that had been there for generations were just kicked off their land.
Pretty much. It was a devastating process, and it had a huge impact on these communities.
Yeah.
And Horrocks argues that something very similar is happening today, but instead of land, it's cyberspace that's being carved up and controlled.
So you're saying TikTok is like those shared highland farms before the fences went up.
That's the comparison the article's making. Think about it. TikTok, with its algorithm that shows you all sorts of diverse stuff, not just what big companies want you to see.
Right.
It's kind of like that open, shared space where communities could thrive.
But then come the fences.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where the forced sale of TikTok comes in.
Exactly. The article argues that governments and corporations are using things like, national security.
Oh, of course, for our safety.
Right, national security as an excuse to grab control of valuable online spaces.
And just like those Scottish farmers, the people who rely on TikTok, the creators, the communities, they're the ones who stand to lose the most, right?
That's the argument, yeah.
It's like being told you can't gather in the town square anymore, right?
Yeah.
That it's all been privatized. You have to follow someone else's rules.
It's a really compelling analogy.
Okay, so we've got TikTok over here with its, as you were saying, more open algorithm. And then you've got the other platforms out there.
Right, like Meta.
Yeah, Facebook, Instagram. And they just feel different, don't they?
Yeah, it's a completely different vibe.
TikTok is kind of, I don't know, all over the place. And then Meta feels very curated, I guess.
Yeah, curated is one way to put it. The article actually argues that Meta's algorithm is pretty much designed to keep us angry and divided.
Oh, okay. So how do they get away with that?
It's all about grabbing your attention and keeping you scrolling.
Right,
Even if it means showing you things that make you upset or anxious.
right.
And that's good for their bottom line, but not so good for society as a whole, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because the article talks about, it mentions Meta rolling back some of their content moderation.
Yeah, which has unfortunately led to increased targeting of trans and queer communities.
And so you have to wonder, if TikTok is supposedly this more free-flowing space where anyone can find an audience, then why is it being targeted,
That's a great question.
Is there something more going on here?
The article suggests it's because TikTok threatens the established powers that be in a way that, say, Meta doesn't.
Okay, in what way?
Well, first of all, it's incredibly popular, especially with young people.
Yeah.
And they're not just using it for fun, they're actually using it as a search engine.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's like they're bypassing Google and other platforms that are heavily influenced by corporate interests.
Okay, so it's like TikTok is bypassing the gatekeepers, the folks who traditionally control what information we see and how we see it.
You got it.
And the article argues that this scares the heck out of those in power because they can't control the narrative on TikTok the way they can on other platforms.
Right.
And by narrative control, what exactly do we mean here?
It's the power to shape how people understand and interpret events. Think about the news, for example.
Yeah.
Who decides what stories get told, how they're framed, and what perspectives are included?
Right. And those decisions, I mean, we know those decisions aren't always neutral.
Exactly. There's always an agenda. And that's what TikTok is disrupting. It's giving a platform to voices that have traditionally been silenced or marginalized. It's allowing for a more diverse range of perspectives to emerge.
Yeah.
And that challenges the carefully crafted narratives that powerful institutions often rely on.
So this is way bigger than just a fight over one app, right? We're talking about a fight for control of information, who gets to tell their story.
Right.
And ultimately, I think you're right. It's a fight for the future of the internet itself.
It's about who has the power to shape the online world we live in.
And that brings us to this pretty chilling concept that the article introduces called cyber eminent domain.
Yeah.
Cyber what now? That sounds, I don't know, kind of ominous.
It is a bit, right? But think about it like this.
Right.
In the real world, the government can seize your property for things like, building a highway.
An eminent domain, right?
Exactly. Well, cyber eminent domain is the idea that they can do the same thing online.
Oh, wow.
They can take control of platforms, data, anything they deem necessary for national security.
Yeah. And we've all seen how that phrase national security gets thrown around,
Right. It can be a pretty broad justification for all sorts of things.
Exactly.
And as Horrocks points out, when it comes to the online world, national security often translates to protecting the interests of powerful corporations.
So it's not about protecting us. It's about protecting them.
And maintaining control over the flow of information.
So maybe it's not about protecting us from some external threat, but about protecting the established order from something much scarier.
Yeah.
A platform that actually gives power to the people.
That's a really interesting way to put it.
And it makes you think, right? Like, what happens when the spaces where we gather and share ideas and build community, what happens when those spaces are no longer truly ours?
That's a question we need to be asking ourselves.
It's a big one.
It is. But before we get too, down in the dumps about all of this,
Yeah.
the article does offer some concrete examples of how TikTok's unique algorithm has actually made a real difference in the world.
Okay, yeah. I'm ready for some hope here.
Okay, so one example that really stands out is the coverage of the conflict in Gaza.
Right.
Horrocks argues that TikTok played a crucial role in amplifying Palestinian voices and perspectives,
Well,
which were largely ignored or misrepresented by mainstream media.
so TikTok gave a platform to people who were being silenced, allowing them to share their stories directly with the world.
Precisely.
And that's incredibly powerful, right? Because it challenges that narrative control that we were talking about.
Right, the control that governments and media organizations often exert.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it gives a voice to the people who are typically marginalized.
That's what makes it so significant.
It's like a crack in the wall of the established order, letting in light that those in power would rather keep out.
I love that analogy because it really highlights why this whole situation is so significant.
Yeah.
The fight over TikTok isn't just about one app. It's about who gets to control the narrative in the digital age and whether we'll have spaces where diverse voices can be heard.
And that brings us to the human cost of this whole cyber enclosure thing, right? We can't forget that real people are being impacted by these decisions.
Absolutely.
So let's delve a little deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm ready when you are.
So we talked about how TikTok is kind of like this digital equivalent of those shared highland farms before they were fenced off, right? But what about the people who actually live on that digital land? What happens to them if TikTok gets shut down?
Yeah, that's where the real human cost of this whole cyber enclosure thing comes in. Horrocks, the author, she spends a lot of time in the article highlighting the experiences of people who found a home on TikTok,
Right.
especially folks from marginalized communities,
Mhm.
those who often don't have a voice elsewhere.
And I think it's important to remember, we're not just talking about numbers here.
Right.
We're talking about real individuals with real stories, real lives.
Absolutely. And one group the article really focuses on is the trans community.
Oh.
It talks about how TikTok has become this space where trans individuals can just be themselves,
Yeah.
share their experiences, connect with others who understand what they're going through.
Yeah, and it's like they don't have to constantly defend their existence, right?
Right. Or conform to someone else's idea of who they should be.
And that freedom to just be yourself, especially online, that's something a lot of us take for granted.
Yeah, for sure.
But for a community that faces so much discrimination and hate in the real world,
Mm-hmm.
that digital space can be a lifeline, right?
Absolutely. And the article points out that it's been more than just a place for connection.
Cricket.
It's been a powerful tool for trans activism.
So it's not just about, sharing funny videos or dance trends, right?
Right. It's about using the platform to actually challenge the status quo and demand recognition and justice.
And it makes you wonder if that's part of the reason why TikTok is being targeted, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not just about data or competition. It's about silencing those voices that are demanding change.
It's a really important point to consider.
Yeah. And the article also talks about another group that's found a home on TikTok, and that's autistic individuals.
Yeah, and just like with the trans community, autistic folks often face a lot of stigma and misunderstanding offline.
In the real world, right.
Exactly. So having this online space where they can connect with others who get it,
People who just understand, yeah.
it's huge.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So how does TikTok specifically help with that?
Hurricks talks about how TikTok allows autistic creators to share their experiences, challenge stereotypes,
Okay.
and connect with others who know what it's like to navigate a world that wasn't really built for them.
Yeah.
It's about finding acceptance and validation.
And that validation, it's so crucial for mental health and well-being, right?
Right. Absolutely. And what's really interesting is that TikTok's algorithm doesn't discriminate based on neurodiversity.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, with its emphasis on authenticity and diverse content,
Right.
autistic creators can actually reach a wider audience and challenge those preconceived notions about what autistic people can or can't do.
So they're not being limited by the algorithm in the same way they might be on other platforms.
Exactly. It's like TikTok has opened up this whole new world of possibilities for them,
Yeah.
to express themselves creatively, connect with others, advocate for their rights.
So imagine if that space is suddenly taken away.
It would be devastating.
Yeah.
Not just for individuals, but for the entire autistic community.
Yeah, it's a real reminder that this fight for the digital commons, it's also a fight for accessibility,
For sure.
inclusivity,
Yeah.
and the right of all people to just express themselves freely online.
That's at the heart of it, really.
And the article doesn't stop there. It also talks about the impact of cyber enclosure on young activists who are using TikTok to organize and mobilize for social change.
Right, because TikTok has become this incredibly powerful tool for young people
Yeah.
to connect with each other, share information, and build movements for social justice.
And again, it's like they're bypassing those traditional gatekeepers, right?
Exactly. They can reach a much wider audience with their message.
It's like they're creating their own news channels, their own advocacy platforms.
Yeah. And they're doing it in a way that really resonates with their generation.
And that's what makes it so powerful, right?
Absolutely.
The article specifically mentions the role TikTok has played in amplifying movements for climate justice, racial justice, LGBTQ plus rights.
It's given them a platform to challenge those narratives that are often used to justify inequality and injustice.
Yeah, and it's empowered them to demand change.
Which is amazing to see.
It really is inspiring to see young people using technology in this way. They're not just passively consuming content, they're creating it, shaping the conversation.
And demanding a better future.
And imagine the impact if that platform is taken away, if those voices are silenced.
It would be a huge setback.
Yeah.
Not just for the movements themselves, but for the future we're trying to build.
Yeah, it's like saying, okay, young people, you can have a voice, but only if it's on our terms. Only if it fits within the existing power structures.
And that's just not acceptable.
It's not. The article, it doesn't sugarcoat things, does it?
No, it's very real about the potential consequences.
It talks about the very real possibility of increased censorship, surveillance,
Yeah.
the silencing of dissenting voices if TikTok is shut down or transformed into something it's not.
It's a scary thought.
It is. It can feel a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
It's understandable to feel that way, but the article also reminds us that we're not powerless in this situation,
Okay.
We have choices we can make, actions we can take, alternatives we can support.
Okay, so let's talk about those alternatives.
Right. So the article mentions Blue Sky as one potential option.
Right. And it's different from the big platforms. How?
Well, Kurix describes it as a decentralized platform
Okay.
that really puts a premium on user privacy and control,
Okay.
and it's built to resist censorship and surveillance.
So it's like a more democratic, more ethical way to connect and share information online.
That's the idea.
And you said it's still in its early stages, right?
It is, yeah.
But at least offers some hope, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, definitely.
Like, we don't have to settle for these platforms that exploit our data, manipulate our emotions, silence our voices.
Right. We can choose to support and build spaces that align with our values.
Exactly. And that's where collective action comes in, right?
Absolutely. It's not enough to just switch platforms.
So what else can we do?
We need to be advocating for policies that actually protect the digital commons.
So things like net neutrality.
Yes, data privacy laws,
Okay.
legislation that limits the power of corporations to control our online lives.
So holding our elected officials accountable.
Exactly. That's a big part of it.
It sounds like a big fight.
It is a big fight, but it's a fight worth having.
Because, I mean, the internet has become such a huge part of our lives now.
Right. It's practically an extension of ourselves.
It is. And the way it's governed, it has such a profound impact on our freedoms,
Absolutely.
on our ability to participate in society.
It's really about democracy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's almost like this fight for the digital commons is a fight for democracy itself.
I think you're right. And while the forces we're up against are incredibly powerful, these big tech companies, governments with their surveillance agendas,
Yeah.
the article reminds us that we're not alone in this.
Okay.
There are millions of people around the world who are concerned about the future of the internet.
So it's a global movement.
It is. People who are working to protect the digital commons and build alternatives to the status quo.
It's like a global movement for digital rights, you know, for a more equitable and democratic internet.
And the more we connect with each other, the more powerful we become.
It's about building solidarity, right?
Absolutely. The article ends on this note of, cautious optimism, reminding us to stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful.
That's the message we all need to hear, especially when things feel bleak.
For sure. What can you do, listener, about all of this? We'll talk about that in the final part of this episode of The Deep Dive.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot in this deep dive about, the historical parallels, the human cost of all of this, and really how the fate of TikTok. It's not just about TikTok, is it?
No, not at all.
It's really about the future of the internet itself, right?
Exactly.
But I think we need to shift gears a little bit here
Okay.
and talk about what we can actually do about all of this.
What can we do?
Because it's easy to get overwhelmed, right? I mean, especially when you see how powerful these tech companies are, how powerful governments are.
Absolutely.
But the good news is that Horrocks doesn't just leave us with this sense of doom and gloom, right?
No, not at all.
The article actually ends with a call to action,
Okay.
a set of concrete steps that we can take to actually push back against this whole trend of cyber enclosure.
I like it. Actionable steps.
Yeah, exactly. So what's step one? Where do we start?
Well, step one is simple, but it's really powerful. It's about being mindful of the platforms you choose.
Okay, so being a conscious consumer of the digital world.
Exactly. Thinking about where you're spending your time online, what you're supporting with your clicks, your data, your attention.
It's like voting with our digital feet.
Right. That's a great way to put it. If we want to see a different kind of online world, we need to put our energy into the platforms that are trying to build it.
I like that. Okay, so that might mean exploring some alternatives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Things like Blue Sky, Mastodon, other platforms that are committed to, decentralization, privacy, user control.
So it's not just about ditching the bad guys. It's about supporting the good guys.
Yeah.
The ones who are actually trying to create a more ethical digital landscape.
Exactly.
Okay, so step one, be mindful of our choices. What's next?
Next step, building community. The article really emphasizes how important it is to connect with other people who share your concerns about the future of the internet.
So it's not enough to just, sit at home and grumble about it on our own. We need to actually find each other.
Right. Get organized, work together.
So join organizations, support organizations that are fighting for digital rights.
Yes. Advocate for policies that protect the open internet.
So things like net neutrality, stronger data privacy laws, speaking out against censorship.
All of that. These are essential steps in building a more democratic and equitable digital world.
Yeah.
And it's something that we can all contribute to in some way.
And it's empowering to remember that we do have power as individuals.
Absolutely.
Even small actions can make a difference.
They really can. Whether it's writing to your elected officials, supporting independent media outlets, just having conversations with friends and family about this stuff.
Raising awareness?
Raising awareness, exactly. We can all play a role in creating a more positive online environment.
The article ends with this quote that I really love. It says, "The commons, whether digital or physical, belong to all of us."
I like that.
And we are stronger together than the forces that seek to control us.
It's so true. And it's a powerful reminder that we have this collective responsibility to protect these spaces. Right?
The spaces where we gather, share ideas, build community.
Yeah, we can't just let these corporations or governments dictate the terms of our online existence. We need to reclaim the digital commons and shape it into something that reflects our values.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
What does all this mean for you? I think the key takeaway is this. Don't despair, right? Get informed, get engaged, get connected. The fight for the future of the internet is happening right now, and we need everyone on board.
It's about making a choice. Are we going to passively accept the enclosure of the digital world? Or are we going to fight for a more open, equitable, and democratic internet?
An internet that empowers everyone.
Exactly. The choice is ours. And the time to act is now.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.
And thanks for thinking deeply with us.